Hillary Clinton received the Margaret Sanger Award. This is a woman who started an organization called Planned Parenthood, and that woman called black people human weeds. And Hillary Clinton says she was her idol. Now, look, if Donald Trump had openly endorsed a member of the Klan and was part of an organization that said that about that he accepted an award from, what would we be talking about now?
While Planned Parenthood still targets black Americans, continuing Margaret Sanger's policy to depopulate African American communities, today nearly 80% of their moratorium clinics are found in black neighborhoods. Most African Americans have been kept in the dark regarding their initial goals. Faye Wattleton, former president of Planned Parenthood, said at Planned Parenthood's 100th anniversary, quote, "As we celebrate the 100th anniversary of Margaret Sanger, our outrageous and our courageous leader, we will probably find a number of areas in which we may find more about Margaret Sanger than we thought we wanted to know." Wattleton admitted in 1992 that Margaret Sanger advocated, quote, "eugenics and the advancement of the perfect race," end quote. Despite targeting blacks for elimination in Planned Parenthood's 1985 annual report, leaders of the organization proclaimed that they were, quote, "proud of our past and planning for our future." Tragically, they have been planning the future of the African American children for years, as African Americans are the only minority race that has not grown since Roe v. Wade, thanks mostly to genocide at the hands of Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood should be called Planned Parenthood, as they murder more black children in 1 hour than the Ku Klux Klan did in their entire history. Margaret Sanger, Planned Parenthood's founder, admitted, quote, "Always to me, any aroused group was a good group, and therefore I accepted an invitation to talk to the women's branch of the Ku Klux Klan." Sanger could relish in such racist speaking engagements with the KKK because she believed the following and stated, quote, "The masses of Negroes," as she stated, particularly in the South, still breed carelessly and disastrously, with the result that the increase among Negroes, even more than amongst whites, is from the portion of the population least intelligent and fit," end quote. In Margaret Sanger's periodical, The Birth Control Review, an article by L. Stoddard, one of Sanger's board of directors, we read about the, quote, "rising tide of color against white world supremacy." And we also read that we must resolutely oppose the inundation of those non-white and inferior races. In no uncertain terms, Sanger, like Adolf Hitler, believed in enforced eugenics and race control, even through murder. Sanger declared, quote, "The undeniably feeble-minded should indeed not only be discouraged, but prevented from propagating their kind," end quote. Thankfully, more and more African Americans, like the National Pro-Life Black Union, are protesting Planned Parenthood over their directed assault at slaughtering mass black babies. In Margaret Sanger's book, The Woman and the New Race, she wrote, quote, "The most merciful thing a large family can do to its infant members is to kill it." Margaret Sanger, like her Nazi contemporaries and her Nazi ally, declared that, quote, "Eugenics is the most adequate and thorough avenue to the solution of racial, political, and social problems." She said, quote, "Eugenic sterilization is an urgent need. We must prevent multiplication of this bad stock." Sanger, echoing Hitler's eugenics program, stated, quote, "Give dysgenic groups, meaning people with bad genes, in our population their choice of segregation or compulsory sterilization."
An organization whose founder believed in eugenics.
You're talking about Margaret Sanger.
Yes, and even today, the plurality of their clinics are in minority communities.
Mm-hmm. Well, doesn't that make the argument that they would make, which is that the services that you're talking about, forget abortion for a second, but the services you're talking about are not available everywhere, and that's where minorities and people who are lower income get mammograms and treatment for STDs and birth control, et cetera?
I thought that they were supposed to be able to get all of those things based on Obamacare. Why do we need Planned Parenthood?
But for Planned Parenthood itself, because Planned Parenthood says none of the tax dollars go to fund abortion on these tapes, you wonder how if some might make money off of it. There's no way of knowing it right now. What we do know is it's a controversial group, but Democrats have seized on Republicans' concerns about Planned Parenthood as being a war on women, that you're out to get women.
Well, you know, maybe I'm not objective when it comes to Planned Parenthood, but, you know, I know who Margaret Sanger is. And I know that she believed in eugenics and that she was not particularly enamored with black people. And one of the reasons that you find most of their clinics in black neighborhoods is so that you can find a way to control that population. And I think people should go back and read about Margaret Sanger, who founded this place, a woman who Hillary Clinton, by the way, says that she admires. Look and see what many people in Nazi Germany thought about her.
This week, Ben Carson made several remarks surrounding Planned Parenthood that many would call conspiracy theories.
Well, you know, maybe I'm not objective when it comes to Planned Parenthood, but, you know, I know who Margaret Sanger is. And I know that she believed in eugenics and that she was not particularly enamored with black people. And one of the reasons that you find most of their clinics in black neighborhoods is so that you can find a way to control that population. And I think people should go back and read about Margaret Sanger, who founded this place, a woman who Hillary Clinton, by the way, says that she admires. Look and see what many people in Nazi Germany thought about her.
That she was for targeting certain races, right?
A great person, yes.
You know, Ben Carson is right. He is right on. Margaret Sanger was a vile racist and a massive proponent of eugenics. She admired the Nazi regime's campaign for forced sterilization and ridding the human race of the so-called unfit. Ben Carson specifically calls out the fact that Planned Parenthood is strategically placing centers in black communities where they can control the black population through abortions and through other birth control. Pastor Clenard Childress Jr. has put together a very well-informed, very well-presented website called blackgenocide.org. I encourage you to check it out. He has lots of good information about this very massive direct attack on the black community, but the mainstream media ignores it. And the Democrats and the leftists and the Hillary Clintons all ignore the fact that almost 1,900 black babies are aborted every single day in this country. You know, Pastor Childress was the first one to, following the Black Lives Matter protest in Ferguson, called attention to the fact that all black lives matter. And then this is morphed into all lives matter. Because at the end of the day, if Americans will not stand up for innocent babies that are being murdered through this very aggressive propagandizing of abortion throughout this country, especially in communities with minorities, who will we stand up for?
In 1939, Margaret Sanger, co-founder of Planned Parenthood, started the Negro Project with the aim of slowing and then reversing the growth of the black population. A staunch advocate of eugenics, the so-called science of purifying the human gene pool, Sanger viewed certain races, especially blacks, as genetically inferior and inclined towards producing human weeds. Reckless breeders spawning human beings who never should have been born. Sanger's strategy, still followed by Planned Parenthood today, involved recruiting so-called progressive black leaders who were persuaded that slowing back birth rates was a key to their people's future success and prosperity. A profoundly disproportionate number of abortion clinics were placed near the inner cities. And since then, an equally disproportionate number of our African American population, more than 15 million, has been weeded out by abortion.
On this fundamental issue, I will not yield, and Planned Parenthood will not yield, because we know that what's at stake is more than whether or not a woman can choose an abortion. Choices about how we lead our lives.
As the most pro-abortion candidate in American history, Barack Obama will make sure this weeding continues.
In 1916, H.G. Wells' lover, Margaret Sanger, starts her promotion of eugenics in the United States. In 1923, Sanger receives massive funding from the Rockefeller family. Sanger wrote to fellow eugenicist Clarence J. Gamble that black leaders would need to be recruited to act as frontmen in sterilization programs directed against black communities. In 1924, Hitler pens Mein Kampf, or My Struggle, and credits U.S. eugenicist as his inspiration.
I admire Margaret Sanger enormously. Her courage, her tenacity, her vision. I am really in awe of her.
By 1927, eugenics hit the mainstream. The so-called science was aggressively pushed through contests at schools, churches, and at state fairs. Churches competed in contests with big cash prizes to see who could best implement eugenics into their sermons. Major denominations then tell Americans that Jesus is for eugenics. That same year in the United States, more than 25 states passed forced sterilization laws, and the Supreme Court ruled in favor of brutal sterilization policies. When Hitler came to power in 1933, one of his first acts was to pass national eugenics laws, modeled after laws in the United States. The Nazi brand of eugenics had embarrassed the elites, but they had no intention of stopping their plans. The Allies literally fought with each other over who would get top Nazi eugenicist. It didn't matter if the SS doctors had tortured tens of thousands to death. They were free to go. The Angel of Death, Joseph Mengele, and his boss, Ottmar von Verscher, were not prosecuted, and von Verscher even continued his work in Germany after the war. Eugenicists were angry that their great work had been exposed. They then scrambled to camouflage their agenda. Eugenics Quarterly became Social Biology. The American Birth Control League became Planned Parenthood. New terms like transhumanism, population control, sustainability, conservation, and environmentalism replaced racial hygiene and social Darwinism.
Mrs. Margaret Slee, president of America's Planned Parenthood Federation, maintains that European women should stop having babies for the next 10 years.
Don't you think such a theory, such a radical theory, is antisocial?
On the contrary, it seems to me that it is more practical and humane.
What about the women who want babies now and in 10 years will not be able to have babies? Rather impractical, don't you think?
Oh, John, you do ask hard questions. I should think that instead of being impractical, it is really very practical and intelligent and humane.
Well, Planned Parenthood has had a startling agenda from its inception, started by a woman whose goal in part was controlling the Black population through abortion and sterilization. Margaret Sanger, with the goal of controlling the Black population and other groups that she thought of the same. Here's a look back at at abortion and the providers, what they've done to minorities.
Abortion is Black genocide. What happens to a mind of a person and the moral fabric of a nation that can accept the aborting of a child without a pang of conscience?
In many Black communities, for every child actually born, 3 others are aborted, more than double the rate among whites. Dr. Clennard Childress, founder of BlackGenocide.org, says the consequences of those figures will eventually end up destroying a whole race of Americans.
African Americans here in this country are the only ethnic group in any place on the globe that's not replacing themselves. This is genocide.
Some say abortion is the #1 killer in the Black community, leading more and more African American churches to speak out and take a stand for life.
Bishop Daniel Robertson of Richmond's Mount Gilead Baptist Church says Black pastors have a responsibility to their communities to do more.
We really need to just, make a statement to the community that we believe the Bible, thou shalt not kill.
But Robertson's church does more than just preach against abortion. For one, they encourage their members to consider adopting these unplanned children.
We go to the abortion clinics and ask people, there are other alternatives. We try to educate people, let them know you don't have to do this. And so we do have that ongoing ministry. And then because our doors are open and we preach the message of Jesus Christ, we do try to give people hope.
In his book, No Shepherd's Cry, Childress says the Black church can no longer be silent on the issue.
If there's a devouring force that is decimating my community, as a shepherd, I must respond with the truth and deliver the lamb with its young from the wolf and the devourer. And the devourer is the abortion industry.
Dr. Childress points out this should come as no surprise, considering that Black Americans were long ago targets of the abortion industry. In the early 20th century, Margaret Sanger founded Planned Parenthood, an organization that later became the nation's largest abortion provider. Sanger encouraged abortion and sterilization to limit the size of black families. Childress says she also used the unaware black minister to further her agenda.
Margaret Sanger, a devout racist, a eugenics, and the author of the Negro Project, knew that the colored minister was going to be pivotal in getting her program across.
Because of that, both Robertson and Childress believe black clergy must take the lead in fighting against abortion.
The colored minister, the Negro minister, the African American minister is pivotal right now in addressing the abortion issue because we have been silent due to political ties and due to some misinformation.
But Robertson says the issue isn't just with the black church, but with the faith community as a whole.
There are a lot of pastors, whether they're black or white, they're just comfortable. They don't want to stir up anything. You can't just stay behind the stained glass windows of your sanctuary, but you really do have to reach out into the community and make a difference.
And Paul Strand is back with me from our Washington bureau. Paul, this story isn't new information for you. What else can you add? Did Sanger target others as well?
Yeah, she didn't just target black people. She also targeted, for instance, Southern Europeans, the darker Europeans. They were flooding into America, and she was saying maybe we have to keep their numbers down. Well, not maybe. She thought their numbers should be kept down. And I haven't seen the direct sources on this, but I think she even had a problem with fundamentalist Christians. So she was all for eugenics. And, the Nazis used her stuff to fashion their programs. And also, she talked to the KKK. She was at one of their rallies and was rousingly cheered. So this woman is sort of a nightmare for people who are defending Planned Parenthood. They really don't want you to know much about Margaret Sanger's past.
Indeed. Well, do you think most people know the history of Planned Parenthood, especially right now, lawmakers who are debating whether the government should use our tax dollars to defund it?
Not only do most people not know the history at all, they don't even know what Planned Parenthood is doing today. This fact that they do more abortions than anybody else in America. In fact, if Planned Parenthood was a country, it would have the 6th highest rate of abortions in the entire world. Most Americans don't know that Planned Parenthood does abortion. So that's the problem here, this absolute lack of knowledge. Most people just think that they're giving women like reproductive health advice and contraceptives, things like that. And what's interesting, there's so many places, 10 times more the number of clinics that are doing these things than Planned Parenthood. If Planned Parenthood disappeared tomorrow, women's health, reproductive health, would be totally taken care of, except for maybe this question of abortions.
Now, you talk to a lot of pro-lifers. What are you hearing from them about all of this?
Well, I think that they are they're somewhat hopeful, but what's interesting to me is this solid wall of opposition as this defunding of Planned Parenthood comes up. And I kind of want to talk about that philosophy, why this is, because you would think as evidence piles up, people would be going, maybe I need to change my mind on this. But I think what we're seeing is that as the conscience has been seared over the decades, people have to prevent cognitive dissonance in the brain, they have to say, well, I'm right about this because maybe this isn't really a life, or this is different than the life of people after they're born, out of the womb. So I think what you're seeing is people trying, they have to stay opposed to it, because what happens in their own minds, what happens in their own hearts, if they say, this is not really, this is a baby, this is indeed a life, this is someone just like me, this is just like my children. So I think that's why you're seeing such a solid wall of opposition, and I think that's going to be an intensely hard thing to crack. So watch for that. Watch to just see how does this wall of solid pro-choice opposition get even firmer as more and more of these videos come out. Where you would think it would crack the wall, instead I bet the wall gets higher and higher.
It's amazing that some people have actually said, if this doesn't move the country to defund Planned Parenthood, what would?
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up.
It took a president to get it done. That dream became a reality because we had a president who said, we're going to do it, and actually got it accomplished.
You voted against the Civil Rights Act in 1964. Would you do so today?
I would have to vote against it.
In 1964, during the presidential election of that year, I was a Goldwater girl. I mean, really, we used to wear little banners which said Goldwater Girl.
Extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice.
When I left law school, my first job was with the Children's Defense Fund.
Well, Hillary Clinton's an old friend, but they're not friends in politics. We profoundly disagreed with the forms of the welfare reform bill.
By the time Bill and I left the White House, welfare rolls had dropped 60%.
Many years after that, when many people are pronouncing welfare reform a great success, we've got growing child poverty. The poor are suffering.
My first job was with the Children's Defense Fund.
Then they'd have to talk about the Clintons' past. The same Confederate flag Bree Newsom took down from above the South Carolina State House represents the exact same slave-owning and traitorous Confederacy for which Bill Clinton signed a resolution stating that the highest star on the Arkansas flag represented. To this day, they still have an official Confederate Flag Day. And not only did Bill and Hillary never say anything about this, but for 12 years, they celebrated the Confederacy too. I wouldn't want to talk about my past either if I were them.
We just had the tape. You just said that I complimented the Republican ideas. That is not true. What I said is that Ronald Reagan was a transformative political figure because he was able to get Democrats to vote against their economic interests to form a majority to push through their agenda, an agenda that I objected to because while I was working on those streets, watching those folks see their jobs shipped overseas, you were a corporate lawyer sitting on the board of Walmart.
The persistent scourge of child labor.
I'm always proud of Walmart and what we do.
Clinton also took a role in supporting a Buy America program.
One of the reasons we want to buy America is because we love America.
Walmart continued to get most of its products from overseas during its Buy America program, including from this factory in Bangladesh that used 11 and 12-year-old girls.
The persistent scourge of child labor.
When he was in trouble in the polls over Jennifer Flowers, he went back to Arkansas, of which he was still governor, and supervised the execution of a mentally disabled, in fact, a lobotomized black defendant called Ricky Ray Rector. He didn't know he'd been sentenced to death. He didn't understand when they came to give him his last meal what was happening. Any other week would have received clemency from the governor because there was no one in the prison thought he should be executed. The prison chaplain resigned on the issue. It was like killing a child.
New Hampshire tonight has made Bill Clinton the comeback kid.
Almost 25% of the world's total prison population. The numbers today are much higher than they were 30, 40 years ago. This bill would have put more police on the street, would have locked up violent offenders so they never could get out again, would have given more prison construction money.
And soon, Democrats began competing with Republicans to prove they could be even tougher on them.
And so it was President Bill Clinton who escalated the drug war far beyond what his Republican predecessors even dreamed possible. And it was President Clinton that championed laws denying federal financial aid to drug offenders for college. It was President Clinton who championed laws banning people with criminal convictions from access to public housing so that people wouldn't have housing upon release from prison. It was the Clinton administration that championed laws denying even food stamps under federal law to people who were once caught with drugs. To a large extent, the basic architecture of this new caste system was championed by a Democratic administration desperate to win back the so-called white swing voters, the folks who had defected from the Democratic Party in the wake of the civil rights movement.
Not just gangs of kids anymore. They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy. We can talk about why they ended up that way, but first we have to bring them to heal. 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 Bring them to heal.
The man who started my success
the President of the United States, Bill Clinton.
The woman who was standing beside Bill Clinton when he signed the Welfare Act admitted before she died that it was the wrong move, that working didn't help her. She worked at a job where she made a little bit of money, and even if after she made a little bit of money, she still couldn't afford her medicine. Clinton used her, just like he used black people, just like Hillary Clinton is using black people now. I'm kind of tired of being used.
By the time Bill and I left the White House, welfare rolls had dropped 60%.
I'm sorry to say what I thought would happen has happened. This was a blunderbuss. This was just an axe, a hatchet. 6 million, 2% of our population have no income except those food stamps. The food stamps is the sole thing that stands between them and being totally without any income.
I want to talk about this story that CNN.com put out dealing with the recession worsens racial wealth gap. Whites have a net worth about 20 times that of blacks and about 18 times that of Hispanics. Who's to blame for this?
She was very close to Robert Rubin, to Lawrence Summers, to the people in the Clinton administration who gave us the radical deregulation of Wall Street. So they're the ones that opened the door to the Wall Street thieves that brought on the Great Recession.
Hillary Clinton has not been a friend to black people. We're not just talking about mass incarceration. This duo has gutted and devastated the black community. You can draw a line from the evaporation of black wealth in the black community back to the deregulation of the Clinton years. I would be hard pressed to find in recent memory another president who's been quite as damaging.
New York has spent a considerable amount of money and effort devising very good tests.
I will end the unfunded mandate known as No Child Left Behind. I do not believe that our children are little test takers. And I do not believe that our teachers should be nothing but test givers.
When you narrow the curriculum and you focus just on those tests, you really demoralize teachers.
Perhaps the most important wreckage to take a look at is really the wreckage of the Democratic Party.
In this campaign, the nation has had to forgive you early and often. We have forgiven you your misspeaking about Martin Luther King's relative importance to the civil rights movement.
New York City, Hillary State, the best nominee that's possible, and the Democrats are throwing the election away. For what? An inadequate black male who would not have been running had it not been a white woman that was running for president.
We have forgiven you the 3 a.m. phone call commercial.
It's 3 a.m. and your children are safe and asleep. But there's a phone in the White House and it's ringing. Something's happening in the world. Your vote will decide who answers that call. Whether it's someone who already knows the world's leaders, knows the military, someone tested and ready to lead in a dangerous world. It's 3 a.m. and your children are safe and asleep. Who do you want answering the phone?
I'm Hillary Clinton, and I approve this message.
We have forgiven you President Clinton's disparaging comparison of the Obama candidacy to Jesse Jackson's.
Jesse Jackson won South Carolina twice, in '84 and '88.
I think people want change. I think they want to get beyond some of the racial politics that has been so dominant in the past.
We have forgiven you for your boasting of your support among working, hardworking Americans, white Americans.
Senator Obama's support among working, hardworking Americans, white Americans, is weakening again.
We have even forgiven you repeatedly praising Senator McCain at Senator Obama's expense and at your own expense and at the Democratic ticket's expense.
I have a lifetime of experience that I will bring to the White House. I know Senator McCain has a lifetime of experience that he will bring to the White House. And Senator Obama has a speech he gave in 2002.
He's a fine man. He is a very fine man.
We need a nominee who can pass the commander-in-chief test. Senator McCain will bring a lifetime of experience And Senator Obama will bring a speech that he gave in 2002.
Hillary Clinton has been very supportive of John McCain. And they've been up there in that treehouse that says no Barack Obama gets up here.
We have forgiven you exploiting Jeremiah Wright in front of the editorial board of the lunatic fringe Pittsburgh Tribune Review. We have forgiven you exploiting William Ayers in front of the debate on ABC. We have forgiven you the photos of Osama bin Laden in an anti-Obama ad.
Now, my husband did not wrap up the nomination in 1992 until he won the California primary somewhere in the middle of June, right? We all remember Bobby Kennedy was assassinated in June.
This nation's deepest shame, its most enduring horror, is political assassination. A person who can let hang in midair the prospect that she might just be sticking around in part just in case the other guy gets shot has no business being the President of the United States.
We all remember Bobby Kennedy was assassinated in June.
Today is the 12th of January 2016, 6 years after the earthquake. And for us, it was important to be in front of the Clinton Foundation because Bill Clinton, as head of the interim Haiti Recovery Commission, was responsible for the $6 billion. He had unlimited control of this money. 6 years after the earthquake, Haiti is in worse condition than it was in 2010. Only Bill Clinton can tell the world what happened with this money.
I know we can make college affordable and get student debt off the backs of young people.
I don't think she should be getting paid that much, honestly. You're already a wealthy person. Why do you need more?
Higher education shouldn't be a privilege for those able to afford it. It should be an opportunity widely available for anyone with the talent, determination, and ambition to learn.
I do not favor abolishing it, however, because I think there are certain egregious cases that still deserve the consideration of the death penalty.
All lives matter.
We cannot keep imprisoning more people than anybody else in the world.
Does no one else see the hypocrisy? Forget about super predators in the 1994 crime bill. When Hillary Clinton said this, she was actively using lobbyists from two major private prison companies to raise campaign cash. And she only stopped taking money from associates of the GEO Group and Corrections Corporations of America after Black Lives Matter and other activists confronted her. But even now, she has campaign staffers that lobby directly for GEO Group on her payroll.
Do you still have the support of Hillary Clinton?
I still support her, and that question of whether I continue to have her support is up to her, but I feel pretty confident I do.
You cannot call yourself an ally if you are going to stand behind a mayor of a city who actively participated in the suppression of a dash cam video showing an execution by a Chicago police officer of a young black man.
Hillary Clinton, she's come out and said that she supports the mayor, she backs the mayor. I don't understand, looking at the evidence that we now know is public, how any person, particularly a presidential candidate, could stand behind someone like Rahm Emanuel.
Madam Secretary, in receiving Planned Parenthood's founder Margaret Sanger's award in Houston on March 27th, you said that you were, quote, in awe of Margaret Sanger. You said that Sanger's life and leadership was one of the most transformational in the entire history of the human race, and that Sanger's work both here and abroad was not done, quote unquote. With all due respect, Madam Secretary, Sanger's legacy was indeed transformational, but not for the better if one happens to be poor, disenfranchised, weak, disabled, a person of color, an unborn child, or among the many so-called undesirables Sanger would exclude and exterminate from the human race. Sanger's prolific writings drip with contempt for those she considers to be unfit to live. I've actually read many of Sanger's articles and her books. Sanger was an unapologetic eugenicist.
Your remarks last month when you called Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, a person whom you enormously admire, were stunning to me. Margaret Sanger clearly embraced bigotry and racism. She advocated for the elimination of the disabled, the downtrodden, and the black child. In one of her writings, she said, "Today, eugenics is suggested by the most diverse minds as the most adequate and thorough avenue to the solution of racial, political, and social problems."
Congressman, let me say with respect to your comments about Margaret Sanger, you know, I admire Thomas Jefferson. I admire his words and his leadership, and I deplore his unrepentant slaveholding. I admire Margaret Sanger.
Margaret Sanger. She was a eugenist who was hailed last month by our own Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton.
I admire Margaret Sanger enormously. Her courage, her tenacity, her vision. I am really in awe of her.
Okay. Not only did Hillary Clinton say that, listen how she compared Sanger to one of our founding fathers last week.
I admire Thomas Jefferson. I admire his words and his leadership, and I deplore his unrepentant slaveholding. I admire Margaret Sanger, being a pioneer in trying to empower women to have some control over their bodies, and I deplore statements that you have referenced. That is the way we often are when we look at flawed human beings. There are things that we admire and things we deplore.
Angela Franks is the author of Margaret Sanger's Eugenic Legacy, the Control of Female Fertility. You know, Angela, Thomas Jefferson was a man in great conflict. He is not one of my favorite founding fathers because he was divided in himself. He was in great turmoil within himself. Was Margaret Sanger in that kind of turmoil? It seems to me that she was pretty much consistent.
That's correct. Jefferson, you can argue, Jefferson didn't devote his life towards promoting slavery. Margaret Sanger did devote her life to promoting eugenics, and so the analogy is not very appropriate.
Okay, eugenics, by the way, is what ended up as the Holocaust. It was making the perfect race. It was getting rid of people. In fact, the progressives in the 1900s, they went into prisons and they wanted to I think it was in Indiana, where they were getting rid of some of the prison population, because if we can off them, then they won't reproduce, and then we'll have the master race. We also have Margaret Sanger. Can we put the picture of Margaret Sanger up here? This is Margaret Sanger at a Klan rally, which a lot of the early progressives were Klan members. I mean, Woodrow Wilson was one of the most racist men to ever be in the White House, and he's a progressive hero. Did all of these things, did she ever disavow them? Did she ever walk away and say, boy, you know, that whole Holocaust thing, that was a mistake?
Well, I think you can argue that Sanger herself didn't hold anti-Semitic attitudes. Her first husband was Jewish, for example. But she promoted a thought world. She promoted an ideology that leads to things like the Holocaust. She divided the world up into the fit and the unfit.
Right. Wasn't Planned Parenthood part of the idea was to get rid of some of the poor babies, get rid of some of the black babies?
The poor have always been the target of eugenicists, from Sanger to Hitler to everybody.
But not African Americans.
Well, Sanger herself didn't say that blacks per se were unfit, but what you see is you can have a racist effect even if you don't have a racist intent, and that's what you see with somebody like Sanger. So she's promoting, implying that if you're poor, you're unfit and that you need to use birth control, and she's saying that the problems of the world are caused by poor people having babies. Okay. And this kind of attitude ends up affecting people like racial minorities, people who are impoverished and disadvantaged.
Okay, I want to play something here from a YouTube debate with Hillary Clinton. This is really important. Remember, Margaret Sanger is a progressive. This is a terrifying, when you learn who progressives are, these were a terrifying group of people that ran our country, and I contend are still running our country. Here's what she said in the YouTube debate when asked, are you a liberal? Watch this.
I prefer the word progressive, which has a real American meaning, going back to the progressive era at the beginning of the 20th century. I consider myself a modern progressive, someone who believes strongly in individual rights and freedoms, who believes that we are better as a society when we're working together.
You know, Angela, I don't know how much you know about progressives, but that doesn't sound like the real American early 20th century progressive that believes in individual rights. That's not what the progressive movement is at all. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the whole idea behind eugenics is it's better for society if you don't reproduce.
Exactly. So Sanger can say that she's the fit, quote unquote, but all these other people out there are the unfit. And so, yes, you're right that progressives were by and large eugenicists. They did believe that if they could keep certain segments of the population from reproducing, that all of the world's problems would disappear. And so that's why this attitude shaded very easily into population control.
Does it bother
you? They would
you?
Say quality, not quantity.
Does it bother you at all that the global warming movement is also all about the progressive movement? That is a progressive movement, and that too is about population control. That too is about if we just didn't have so many humans on the planet. Where over in Europe there are people. I mean, I've read several interviews with people who are saying, you know what, we're just not going to have any children, and everybody should just only have one child, etc., etc. That is the same thing. It's just not the state coming in and killing your child.
It's very dangerous. There's this strong attitude that people are the world's problem. And so it's a very anti-humanist sort of attitude that you see in the population control movement. And you're absolutely right that it's become closely connected to environmentalism.
Okay.
So I think it's a great concern.